Thank you for joining Detective Duo, your companion for stories of wit, charm, and quiet suspense, the kind Tommy and Tuppence might have uncovered in their early adventures. Subscribe for more of these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from. "Tommy," said Tuppence Beresford, planting her elbows on the breakfast table with the air of a woman prepared to start a revolution, "we are going modern." Tommy lowered his newspaper by half an inch, the better to assess how dangerous this particular proclamation might be. "Are we indeed? Must I wear goggles?" "Don't be dense," she retorted. "Modern detection, streamlined, efficient, and appealing to the domestic market. I intend to specialize in small mysteries, lost brooches, stolen letters, strange lodgers. It's the everyday crimes that pay, my dear." Tommy, who had long ago accepted that resisting Tuppence's enthusiasm was like reasoning with a brisk sea wind, folded the paper. "You mean to tell me, Mrs. Beresford, that our noble agency will sink from international espionage to investigating missing teapots?" "Exactly so. It keeps the mind tidy." Before he could reply, she leaned forward, eyes gleaming at something in the open newspaper. "Oh, listen to this. Local woman claims to have witnessed her own death. Isn't that perfectly extraordinary?" Tommy reached for the paper, sceptical. The notice was buried in the small column of oddments, wedged between an escaped parrot and a record-setting marrow. It read, "Mrs. Iris Lawton of Hampstead reports to have seen a vision of herself being murdered from across the street. Police dismiss it as nervous delusion." "Delusion, I should think," Tommy murmured, but Tuppence was already on her feet. "My dear man, this is exactly what I mean. A deliciously absurd domestic mystery. We must go at once." "Before I finish my toast?" "Yes, bring it along if you must." An hour later, they were stepping through the neat hedgerows of Hampstead, Tuppence's stride brisk and sure, Tommy's more resigned. The boarding house at number 23 Hawthorne Road stood prim and respectable, its lace curtains fluttering with self-importance. A thin maid opened the door and looked at them as though visitors were a personal affront. "Mrs. Lawton's expecting you?" "She soon will be," Tuppence said sweetly, and swept in before the girl could protest. Mrs. Iris Lawton proved to be an elegant woman of perhaps 50, silver blonde hair, soft blue eyes rimmed with fatigue, and hands that fluttered nervously over a tea tray. The sitting room smelled faintly of lavender polish and something sharper, fear, perhaps. "I don't know what you'll think of me," she began, twisting a handkerchief, "but I swear it was real. I saw myself die." Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy that managed to be both sympathetic and intrigued. "Start at the beginning, Mrs. Lawton. Every detail, if you please." The woman drew a trembling breath. "It was last night, just after 10. I'd been feeling restless, so I went to the window for air. Across the street, in the house opposite, one of the curtains was partly drawn. I saw a woman sitting in a chair, my chair, wearing my grey dress, and behind her, a man." Her voice broke. He was strangling her with a cord. Tommy, notebook in hand, asked gently, "And you're quite certain the woman resembled you?" "She was me. The same face, the same brooch I wore only yesterday. I screamed, but when my landlady came, the window opposite was dark." Silence hung, punctuated only by the faint clink of porcelain. Tuppence leaned forward. "You've spoken to the police?" "Yes. They said it was a dream, a nervous fancy, but I didn't dream it, Mrs. Beresford. I saw myself die." Her sincerity was unnerving. There was nothing hysterical about her tone now, only quiet conviction. Tommy cleared his throat. "Do you live alone, Mrs. Lawton?" "My husband died 3 years ago. I've lodgers, but they're away. There's only me and the landlady downstairs." "Any enemies? Someone with a reason to wish you, unwell?" A flicker passed across her face. "No, none that I know of. Though," she hesitated, "there was a man, my husband's business partner, Leonard Trentham. He was kind at first, then insistent." Tuppence's eyebrows rose slightly. "Insistent?" "In calling, in suggesting I sell certain papers my husband left. When I refused, he grew angry. But that was months ago." "Still," Tommy said lightly, "anger has a way of lingering in certain gentlemen." Mrs. Lawton rose suddenly, crossing to the window. "It was there," she said, pointing. "That house, see, with the green shutters, the room on the first floor." Tuppence joined her, gazing across the street. The window opposite stared back, blank, innocent. "Shall we look?" she asked. Before Mrs. Lawton could protest, the Beresfords were already at the door. They promised to return in the morning and pursue the matter properly. Back at the boarding house, Mrs. Lawton was pacing like a trapped bird. "Did you see it? The room?" "We did," Tuppence said gently, "and I'm afraid someone's been using it." Mrs. Lawton clasped her hands. "Then I'm not mad." "Certainly not. Merely the victim of something exceedingly odd." She smiled faintly, tears of relief trembling in her lashes. "You'll help me, won't you?" "Of course," said Tuppence. "We'll find out what you saw, and why." As they left, Tommy murmured, "You do realize, my sweet, that we've just volunteered to investigate a murder that may not have happened?" "Oh, it's happened," she said with quiet certainty. "If not last night, then soon, and when it does, we'll be the only ones who believed her." Tommy glanced back once more at the blank window across the street. It reflected only the sky, pale and pitiless, but he had the distinct feeling that something, or someone, was watching from behind it. The next morning, Tuppence Beresford was already halfway through a second cup of coffee when Tommy appeared, still tying his cravat, looking faintly aggrieved at civilization. "I hope," he said, "that this early start is due to your conscience and not another of your philanthropic crusades." "It's due to curiosity," Tuppence replied briskly. "And before you protest, I've made sandwiches." "Ah, so it's serious." She slid the newspaper across to him, the article neatly circled in blue pencil. "Mrs. Lawton's name has reappeared. The lady who saw herself die refuses to comment further, which means she's either been warned or humiliated. Either way, she needs us." Tommy eyed her with mock severity. "You realize this will end with us poking around someone's empty house, being mistaken for burglars, and explaining ourselves to a constable." "Possibly," said Tuppence cheerfully, reaching for her gloves. "But if we're lucky, there'll be a clue before the handcuffs." The next morning, Hampstead was washed clean by a faint drizzle. The Beresfords walked the familiar road from Mrs. Lawton's boarding house to the house opposite, the one with green shutters that had stared blankly back the night before. It looked as unremarkable as a biscuit tin, square, beige, and forgettable. Still, there was something uneasy about its stillness. Tuppence pressed the gate latch and stepped inside. The small front garden was overgrown, the grass wet underfoot, the air faintly scented with damp leaves and neglect. Tommy gave the doorbell a try. The metallic note echoed, unanswered. "Seems we've the place to ourselves again." Tuppence examined the brass letterbox. Dust on the hinge. It hasn't been opened in weeks. She crouched, peering closer. "Except, look here, one faint fingerprint, recently smudged. Someone's been in or out." Tommy grunted. "You and your fingerprints. How do you suppose we enter, Sherlock?" "With panache," she replied, and before he could protest, produced a thin wire hairpin from her hat. "You can't keep a girl out with a simple latch." The lock gave a delicate click. "Breaking and entering. Again," Tommy murmured. "We've really gone up in the world." Inside, the air was thick with dust and quiet. The narrow hallway led to a sitting room at the front, where a sheet-draped sofa huddled like a ghost beside the window. Tuppence crossed to the mantelpiece, brushing dust from an abandoned clock that had stopped at 10:15. "The same hour she said she saw it," she murmured. Tommy opened the curtains a fraction wider. Nothing but gloom. The light fell across the furniture, and there it was. A single chair stood by the window. Unlike the others, it was free of dust, its cushions faintly indented. On the table beside it sat a teacup, a rim of dried tea marking the porcelain. "Someone sat here, Tommy, recently." He examined the cup. No lipstick mark. "Which proves nothing," said Tuppence. "Some women are tidy even when terrified." Tommy sniffed the air and frowned. "There's a smell, something floral, not the usual dust and decay perfume." Tuppence leaned closer. The faint trace of lavender mixed with powder, Mrs. Lawton's scent precisely. The memory of the frightened widow's trembling hands and perfumed handkerchief flashed in her mind. "It's her perfume," she whispered. "Tommy, what if it was her sitting here? Then who was strangling her across the street?" She bit her lip. Someone meant her to believe she'd gone mad. They searched the rest of the house. Dust lay thick on every surface except in that one room. A faded newspaper dated 2 weeks prior lay by the hearth. A vase of dead flowers drooped in a corner, their stems dry. In the kitchen, Tommy found a nearly empty tin of cocoa and a single glass with a lip print faintly visible under the grime. "Someone's been using the place all right," quietly. Tuppence turned to him, voice low. "Why use it at all, unless it's to watch her?" Tommy followed her gaze back toward the sitting-room window, where the view framed Mrs. Lawton's boarding house directly opposite. The very window from which the woman claimed to have seen her own death stared back at them, reflecting their own faces. "A perfect mirror," Tuppence murmured. She saw herself, and someone wanted her to. As they left, the house seemed to exhale behind them, settling back into stillness. On the pavement, a middle-aged man with a dog paused and lifted his hat politely. "Excuse me," Tuppence said. "Do you happen to know who owns that house?" He smiled, glad to be consulted. "Used to belong to a Miss Trentham. Sold last year, I think. Been empty since, though I did notice a car there one night last week. Black motor, parked without lights. Strange, that." "Strange indeed," Tommy replied. The man shrugged. "Didn't see who was in it. Could have been the estate agent, I suppose." Tuppence thanked him, but as they walked away, her mind was racing. "Leonard Trentham," she murmured. "Mrs. Lawton's husband's partner. Same name as the owner. That's no coincidence." Tommy's brows drew together. "You're suggesting he still has the keys?" "I'm suggesting he has something to hide." They returned to the boarding house for a final word with Mrs. Lawton. The maid admitted them reluctantly. "Mrs. Lawton's resting," she said. "Doctor's orders." "Never mind," said Tuppence. "We'll only take a moment." Mrs. Lawton was seated by her fire, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes haunted but sharp. "You've been," she said at once. "You saw it, didn't you?" "We saw the room," Tommy said carefully, "and signs of someone there, recently." Her hands twisted the shawl tighter. "I knew it. He told me I was mad, but I knew." "Who told you that?" She hesitated. "Mr. Trentham. He came last month asking about my husband's papers. He said I'd regret keeping them." Tuppence leaned forward. "Did you?" "I burned them," she whispered. "I was frightened, but perhaps I shouldn't have." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. Burning papers, an empty house, a phantom reflection. It all pointed to something deliberate, but the pattern remained tantalizingly incomplete. When they left, Tuppence was quiet for once. The wind tugged at her scarf as they reached the corner. "Well?" Tommy asked. "I don't like it," she said simply. "If someone wanted to scare her, they've done it far too well. And if she isn't mad, she's in danger." Tommy offered his arm. "So, our next move?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes were shadowed. "We find out what Trentham's been doing in that house, and why Mrs. Lawton smells of her own ghost." That night, as they sat by the fire in their flat, the glow of the coals softening the edges of the day, Tuppence stared into the flames. "A mirror," she murmured. "A woman sees herself die in one. But mirrors can lie, can't they, Tommy?" "Constantly," he said dryly, "especially the shaving one. But in this case, yes, someone's reflecting back exactly what they want her to see." "Then we'll break the reflection," she said, voice firm again, "before it breaks her." Outside, the city hummed on, unaware of the strange puzzle unfolding behind its quiet curtains. And somewhere in Hampstead, behind a shuttered window, a faint gleam of movement caught the streetlight, like a watcher leaning forward for the next act. "Tommy, if you ask me," said Tuppence, balancing her teacup precariously on a stack of case notes, "we're standing at the edge of something rather wicked, and possibly theatrical." "Everything with you is theatrical," Tommy replied mildly, setting down his pipe and eyeing the chaos she had created on their office table. "But if you're referring to the case of the duplicated widow, I agree it's wicked. I'm just not sure it's real." "Oh, it's real enough," Tuppence insisted. "A woman doesn't invent her own death for amusement. Someone wanted her to doubt her mind, and now, I suspect, they'll want us to doubt ours." Tommy was about to respond when a firm rapping came from the front door. He glanced at the clock. "Postman. And at this hour, it's rarely bills, so I dread to think what you've subscribed us to." "Don't be absurd," Tuppence said, though she was already halfway across the room. The postman handed over a single envelope, unremarkable but for its neat copperplate hand. "Mrs. Lawton, care of Beresford and Company," Tommy read aloud. "We're becoming forwarding agents for the anxious." Tuppence tore it open with a decisive flick of the letter opener. Inside lay one sheet of ivory paper. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she read, "You were not meant to see it. Forget what you saw. No signature, no address." The handwriting slanted delicately, feminine but disguised by a deliberate stiffness, as if the writer had been imitating herself. "Well," Tuppence murmured, "that's polite intimidation if ever I saw it." Tommy frowned. It could be a cruel joke. Some crank who read the newspaper story. She shook her head. "No, Tommy. Look at the envelope. No postmark. It was hand-delivered. Someone knows where she came for help." The implications settled like dust in the lamplight. Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "There's no time to waste. We must get back to Hampstead." "Do you ever tire of charging into danger like a terrier into a hedge?" "Never," she said, already fastening her coat. "Besides, if I stop now, you'll have to think of something useful to do." They reached Mrs. Lawton's boarding house just after noon. The street was quieter than before, its rhythm subdued. A milk cart rattled away in the distance, leaving only the faint squeak of its wheels echoing along the pavement. Tuppence knocked smartly. The same sullen maid opened the door, her expression pinched. "Mrs. Lawton, please," Tuppence said briskly. The girl hesitated. "She's not in, ma'am." "Not in, or not answering?" The maid's eyes darted sideways. "She went out this morning, didn't say where." Tommy caught the note of uncertainty. "And left no message?" "She didn't take her handbag," the girl blurted suddenly. "Or her coat. Just went out. The landlady's worried, truth be told." Tuppence's voice softened. "May we speak with her?" Mrs. Ransom, the landlady, appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked pale and flustered. "I don't like it, sir, not one bit. Mrs. Lawton wasn't herself after you left. Paced half the night. Then this morning she said she was expecting a letter. I saw her go to the door, but no one was there. A few minutes later I heard the front door click. She's been gone ever since." "And she left her things?" Tommy asked. Mrs. Ransom nodded. "Her bag's on the table upstairs, all her money still in it." Tuppence's eyes met Tommy's. That doesn't sound like a woman who planned to leave. They followed the landlady up the narrow stairs to Mrs. Lawton's room. It was neat but disturbed, the impression of someone who had dressed in haste. The bedclothes were rumpled, the wardrobe door ajar, and a faint trace of perfume hung in the air. On the dressing table lay the handbag, half open. Inside were coins, a folded handkerchief, and a photograph of a younger Mrs. Lawton beside a smiling man, her late husband presumably. But Tuppence's attention was caught by something else, an envelope tucked beneath the mirror, as if hidden in panic. She drew it out, a blank sheet of paper, or nearly blank. On the faintest angle, a crease revealed the impression of handwriting once pressed atop it. She tilted it toward the light, reading the ghost of the words, "She knows. Take care." "Tommy," she breathed. Someone tried to warn her. He frowned, examining the paper. But who? Perhaps the same person who sent our note and changed their mind. They left the room in silence. At the front door, Tuppence paused. The street felt watchful, as if last night's eyes still lingered. If she's been taken, there must be a reason. Or if she fled, it was fear that drove her. She was frightened, yes, but of what? Or whom? The postman appeared again at the end of the street, sorting letters. Tuppence hurried toward him. "Did you deliver one here earlier today?" He squinted. "No, miss. Only dropped one at your address this morning. Odd thing. Woman asked me where Beresford and Cumbey was. Said she wanted something delivered privately. Gave me the letter and a shilling for the trouble." "What did she look like?" Tommy asked quickly. "Hard to say, veil over her face, but her gloves were—" He paused. "Blue. I remember because they were torn at the wrist." Tuppence's brow furrowed. Blue gloves, like Mrs. Lawton wore yesterday. "Could it have been her?" Tommy asked. "Or someone pretending to be," Tuppence murmured. They returned to their car, the streets gleaming from a recent shower. Tuppence sat silent, fingers drumming the steering wheel. "Tommy, it's a pattern," she said finally. "Every step, mirrors, doubles, now a message written by one woman pretending to be another. It's all about imitation." He nodded slowly. "Impersonation, you mean?" "Yes. And Mrs. Lawton's greatest fear was seeing herself die. What if that wasn't madness at all, but recognition?" Tommy gave a low whistle. "Recognition of whom?" Tuppence's voice dropped. "A twin, a ghost, or an enemy clever enough to become her reflection. The car turned a corner, tires hissing on the wet street. "We need facts," Tommy said firmly. "The boarding house, the opposite house, the man with the cane, they're all threads of one weave. Let's start pulling." She nodded, but her eyes remained distant, fixed on the mirror. "Someone doesn't want the truth remembered," she said softly, "and they've already taken the only witness who saw it." That evening, as twilight settled over their flat, Tuppence stood at the window, arms folded. The lights of the city blinked like coded signals, messages half understood. Tommy came in with 2 cups of tea. "You're brooding again?" he said. "I'm thinking." "Dangerous habit." She ignored him. The letter wasn't a threat, it was an instruction. Forget what you saw. It wasn't warning her of danger, it was ordering obedience. Tommy handed her a cup. "So our vanished widow disobeyed, and now she's missing." "Yes." Tuppence's voice was grim. "Which means whoever wrote that note will come looking for the next person who's seen too much." He glanced toward her. "Meaning us?" Tuppence smiled faintly. "Meaning we'd better not be at home when they do." The bell above the door gave a delicate chime as Tuppence entered the antiques shop, its muted ring immediately swallowed by the heavy scent of old polish and time. Dust motes drifted like shy ghosts through slanted morning light, glimmering over glass cabinets and bric-a-brac that seemed to have quietly outlived their owners. A portly gentleman in a pinstripe waistcoat emerged from behind a tall grandfather clock, rubbing his hands as though conjuring customers by friction. "Good morning," he said, the words half a sigh, half a greeting. "May I interest you in something specific, or shall I assume you've come to browse sentimentally?" "We're here on behalf of a friend," Tuppence said sweetly. "A Mrs. Lawton. I believe she was here recently?" The man's brows lifted, and for a brief instant something flickered. Surprise, perhaps unease. "Mrs. Lawton? Ah, yes. Charming lady. Came in about, let me see, 10 days ago. She was accompanied by a gentleman." Tommy, leaning idly against a glass counter, asked, "What sort of gentleman?" "Middle height, well-dressed. Walked with a cane. Though I'd say the limp was rather selective. It came and went as he spoke." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "And what did they buy?" "Little of consequence. A silver snuff-box. A clock with a cracked face. He did most of the talking. She seemed hesitant. I remember thinking she didn't really want to be here." "Did he pay?" "In cash. Notes, quite fresh. Seemed nervous, glanced toward the street every few moments." Tuppence nodded slowly, fingers tracing a pattern on the countertop. "Would you recall his name?" "I asked him for a card," said the shopkeeper, but he only smiled and said, "No need. Mrs. Lawton knows where to find me." Tommy smiled wryly. "I expect she did." The shopkeeper hesitated, then added, "One curious thing. When they left, she dropped her gloves. I picked them up and called after her, but he turned back first, snatched them from my hand and said, quite sharply, 'She won't need them again.' Then they drove off." The words hung there unnervingly casual, until even the ticking clocks in the shop seemed to hesitate. "Thank you," said Tuppence quietly. "You've been most helpful." Outside, the London street was alive with its usual dissonant melody, tram bells, gossip, and the slow rumble of motor cars. Tommy drew a deep breath. Well, that confirms one thing. She wasn't alone in this business. "No," said Tuppence, watching the shop windows reflect the passing crowd, "and the man with the cane doesn't limp unless it suits him. That tells me vanity or deceit, or both." Tommy grinned. You could always spot deceit in a man's accessories. "It's a gift," she said, but her tone was distracted. "Do you feel we're being watched?" He turned slightly, scanning the street. A sleek black car sat idling a few yards away, its polished surface catching the grey light. Behind the wheel, a man in a bowler hat appeared to be reading a newspaper, upside down. Tommy murmured, "Amateur," and here I was hoping for something subtle. As if on cue, the man looked up, their eyes met, and he started the engine. The car pulled away smoothly, tyres whispering against the wet pavement. Tuppence darted forward, and a gust of air from the departing car sent a scrap of paper swirling at her feet. She stooped and caught it, a torn fragment of letterhead bearing the faint imprint, "Cranley Investments Ltd." Tommy tilted his head. "Does the name mean anything?" Tuppence's expression sharpened. "Yes. Cranley was Mrs. Lawton's late husband's firm. Then someone's been resurrecting the dead, financially speaking. Or burying them properly, Tuppence murmured. Back at their flat, Tuppence spread the fragment across the desk, its watermark pale against the lamplight. We need facts, not guesses, she said briskly. You look up Cranley Investments. I'll ring up our friend at the Gazette. Tommy opened his notebook, muttering, If I'd known detective work involved so much stationery, I'd have apprenticed to a clerk. While he scoured the business directory, Tuppence telephoned the Gazette office and soon had the familiar rasp of Lon Cohen on the line. Tuppence Beresford, haven't heard your dulcet tones since that affair with the poisoned marmalade. I've moved on to widows and impersonators, she replied. Tell me, what do you know about Cranley Investments? Small firm, old money once, went quiet after the founder died. Rumour says it's being run these days by Leonard Trentham. Smooth chap, does well with other people's funds. Discreet, very expensive dinners, that sort of thing. Any scandals? A whisper or two, nothing proven. Why? I'll tell you when I've got something juicier than whispers. Thanks, Lon. She replaced the receiver just as Tommy looked up. Confirmed, he said. Cranley Investments, Director Leonard Trentham, former partner of one Henry Lawton, deceased. Offices in Belgrave Square, and, he added, tapping the paper, their accounts were audited last quarter. Massive transfer to a private bank in Geneva. Tuppence's eyes brightened. So the firm's still very much alive, and possibly laundering its conscience. Tommy leaned back, studying her. You think Trentham's the man with the cane? Fits the pattern. He knew Mrs. Lawton, he has access to the company, and perhaps a motive buried under ledgers. She did mention he'd been insistent about her husband's papers. Yes, said Tuppence, her tone sharpening, and now she's disappeared. I'd say that qualifies him for our next appointment. The next morning found them at Belgrave Square, where wealth and discretion shared the same polished pavement. Cranley Investments occupied a dignified Georgian townhouse whose brass plate gleamed with understatement. Inside, the office was a composition of quiet luxury, mahogany, soft carpets, and the faint smell of cigars that had been extinguished before the door opened. A secretary, crisp, elegant, and as unapproachable as an ice sculpture, escorted them to a private room. Leonard Trentham rose from behind a desk that gleamed like a mirror. He was in his late 40s, his hair prematurely silver, his smile well rehearsed. But it was his cane, leaning casually against the chair, that caught Tuppence's eye. Ebony, silver handle, polished to vanity. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, he said smoothly, I've heard of your little enterprise. What brings you to my door? Tuppence smiled with disarming warmth. We're investigating a rather curious incident involving Mrs. Iris Lawton. I understand you were once her husband's partner. His expression didn't flicker. Indeed, Henry was a fine man. Tragic loss. You've remained in touch with his widow? Occasionally, he said lightly. Why? She's gone missing, said Tommy. Trentham's brow lifted as if considering whether concern would be fashionable. Really? I hadn't heard. Someone delivered a threatening note to her through our office, Tuppence added, watching his eyes closely. You wouldn't know anything about that? Certainly not. Mrs. Lawton's affairs are her own. But Cranley's affairs, Tuppence asked softly. Those are rather intertwined, aren't they? For the first time his composure wavered. Just a fraction, but enough. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do, she said pleasantly. You see, we found this. She laid the torn letterhead fragment on his desk. He glanced at it, smiled thinly, and pushed it back. You've been misled, Mrs. Beresford. That could have come from anywhere. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. He rose, taking the cane in hand with an ease that belied the limp he displayed a moment later. Tuppence rose too, her voice silk over steel. If Mrs. Lawton contacts you, tell her we're still listening and watching. He inclined his head. Of course, but I shouldn't wait by the telephone if I were you. Back outside, Tommy exhaled. Well, that was civilized menace if ever I heard it. He's hiding something, Tuppence said. He knew the fragment before he saw it, and his limp only reappeared once he noticed us noticing. Tommy smiled. You've the instincts of a hawk. I prefer cat, she replied, graceful, curious, and inclined to pounce. As they reached the car, she glanced once more up at the windows of Cranley Investments. A silhouette moved briefly behind the blinds, broad shoulders leaning on a cane. As they drove through the city, the rhythm of traffic filled the silence between them. "Smile for the audience, Mr. Trentham," she murmured under her breath. "The show's only just begun." "I dare say he won't," Tuppence replied. Outside, the chill of the afternoon hit them like a small, refreshing slap. Tommy exhaled, adjusting his hat. "Well, that was bracing. What do we think of our friend Leonard Trentham?" "That he's the sort of man who lies for the aesthetic pleasure of it," Tuppence said, "and that he knows exactly what happened to Mrs. Lawton." They paused beside their car, the wind teasing the edge of Tuppence's scarf. Tommy gave a low whistle. "He slipped, didn't he, about that will?" "He slipped and smiled through it. That's worse." "And that photograph," said Tommy thoughtfully. "Sylvia Durrant. You notice the resemblance?" Tuppence nodded slowly. "To Mrs. Lawton, yes. Enough to be sisters, or reflections." She stared back at the office building, the high windows gleaming like blind eyes. "He said she left years ago, but he reacted like she'd just walked in." Tommy leaned against the car door. "If I were writing this, I'd say we've 2 women, 1 man, and a great deal of money tying them together." "And if I were writing it," said Tuppence, "I'd say one of those women isn't who she claims to be." Tuppence's mind whirred with images: the frightened widow, the reflection in the window, the perfume, the letter, and now the photograph of the smiling secretary. Finally she spoke. "Tommy, the shopkeeper said the man with the cane was nervous. Trentham wasn't nervous today." "True, he was stage-managed." "Exactly, which means that in the shop he wasn't playing himself." Tommy frowned. "Then who was he playing?" "Someone who didn't want to be recognized. Someone acting under duress or partnership." "You think there was a woman with him?" "There was a woman with him," she said quietly. "And if that wasn't Mrs. Lawton, it was Sylvia Durrant." They stopped at a red light near Piccadilly. Across the street, a man limped slightly as he crossed the road, swinging a cane that glinted silver in the lamplight. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Tommy," she said softly, "does that look familiar?" He followed her gaze. The gait was the same, the elegance calculated. But before they could react, the man turned the corner and vanished into the crowd. "Coincidence, perhaps," said Tommy. "Coincidences," Tuppence said, "are the lazy man's alibi." They turned toward home, the weight of the conversation pressing against the hum of the engine. Tuppence stared out at the passing lights. "He's lying about Sylvia Durrant," she said finally. "And that cane, his manner, his eyes, it all matches too perfectly. The man in the shop, the one who frightened Mrs. Lawton, the one who vanished into the dark. Trentham fits them all." Tommy smiled faintly. "I suppose next you'll want to prove it." "Of course," she said, "but not yet. Let him think he's fooled us. It's what men like Leonard Trentham do best, until they forget which lie they're living." As their car turned off toward Chelsea, the first lights flickered on in the city's upper windows. In one of them, unseen by either of them, a figure stood at the glass, motionless, cane in hand, watching the Beresfords drive away. Tuppence Beresford tapped her pencil against the side of her teacup, her mind busy with ghosts. "Sylvia Durrant," she murmured aloud. "A woman who looks like Mrs. Lawton, disappears at sea, and leaves behind a trail of men who lie about her. If I were writing the script, Tommy, I'd call this part The Resurrection." Tommy looked up from his notebook. "And if I were writing it, I'd call it The Case That's Getting Entirely Too Complicated Before Lunch." She smiled faintly. "You're just annoyed because your end involves arithmetic. I'm going to chase a dead woman's reflection, and you're stuck with ledgers." "I'm beginning to prefer corpses," he muttered, but there was fondness in it. "What's the plan?" "We divide and conquer," Tuppence said. "You follow the money, I'll follow the mirror." Her first call was to a marina off the Thames where Sylvia Durrant's alleged boating accident had taken place 2 years before. The owner, Mr. Horace Blythe, greeted her in a threadbare sweater that smelled faintly of petrol and damp rope. His office was a shed lined with old photographs of better days, men in striped blazers and women in parasols, smiling over champagne glasses beside tidy wooden boats. "Miss Durrant, eh?" he said, squinting at the record book Tuppence had asked to see. "Oh, I remember that business. Pretty young thing. Tragic accident, they called it." "They called it?" He shifted uneasily. his thick fingers fidgeting with the brim of his cap. Well, between us, it wasn't quite as tidy as they made it out. The police report, let's just say it was massaged a bit. Mr. Trentham saw to that. Tuppence's eyebrows lifted. Leonard Trentham? The same. He came down after it happened, told me it'd be better for everyone if it were handled quietly. Promised compensation, too. The papers said she drowned, but he trailed off, voice lowering. The current that day ran east. If she'd gone overboard there, the body should have washed up within 48 hours. It never did. Did you believe she died? He looked out toward the glimmering water. I believed what I was paid to believe, Mrs. Beresford. But I'll tell you this. She wasn't planning a pleasure cruise. She'd had an argument earlier that week. Said she was marrying someone important, someone who could protect her. And she was frightened. Of whom? He hesitated, eyes flicking to Tuppence's face as though weighing the cost of honesty. She said, "A woman's wrath is colder than the sea," whatever that meant. Tuppence let the silence stretch, only the faint creak of ropes and gull cries filling it. "You've been very helpful," she said at last. "You've earned your conscience back." Meanwhile, Tommy was navigating a different ocean entirely, the tides of financial deceit. Cranley Investments' ledgers, as obtained through a discreet contact at the Gazette, revealed a labyrinth of accounts. Sitting at their kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, he muttered to himself, transfers from Cranley to a holding company, L. Trentham and Associates, then again to something in Geneva. The same pattern every quarter. He scrawled notes furiously, drawing arrows and underlining sums. One entry stood out, a substantial withdrawal labelled Personal Disbursement SD. He frowned. SD, Sylvia Durrant. He picked up the telephone. "Cohen? Tommy here. Do me a favour, check if Sylvia Durrant had any legal identity transfers in the past 2 years. Passport renewals, name changes, anything that would have gone quiet." There was a pause, then Lon Cohen's voice crackled back. "You're in luck, or out of it. Someone named Sylvia Durrant applied for a passport renewal under a different name a year ago. Name of, wait for it, Mrs. Iris Trentham." Tommy froze, the receiver heavy in his hand. "Good Lord," he whispered. "Tuppence, you'd better be right about the mirror." Tuppence's next appointment was in Mayfair, a beauty salon that smelled faintly of rosewater, hair tonic and secrets. The proprietress, Madame Eloise, was a formidable woman with a sculpted chignon and a disarming smile. "Mrs. Beresford," she purred, "we remember all faces here, dear. It's our business." Tuppence laid down a photograph, one she'd found in the Gazette's archives, of Sylvia Durrant standing beside Henry Lawton. "Have you seen this woman recently?" Madame Eloise adjusted her spectacles. "Ah, yes, indeed. She used to come often before her accident. But how curious. You are not the first to ask me that this year." "Really? Who else?" "A lady came in last month, looked exactly like her. Same hair, same tilt of the chin, only older. Called herself Mrs. Trentham." Tuppence's pulse quickened. "Describe her." "Poised, elegant, the sort of woman who tips in notes, not coins. She wanted a dye to match her previous shade, ash blonde, and she insisted on a certain perfume. I remember because it was discontinued years ago." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Let me guess. Lavender and powder." Madame Eloise's eyes brightened. "Why, yes, you know her?" Tuppence leaned back in her chair. "Let's say we've met her reflection." That evening, the Beresfords compared notes over supper, the small lamp between them casting twin halos of light. "She called herself Mrs. Trentham," Tuppence said, "and she looked exactly like Mrs. Lawton. Either Sylvia Durrant didn't die, or Mrs. Lawton isn't who we think she is." Tommy slid his papers toward her. "Then listen to this. Cranley's money trail leads to a ghost. Every quarter, funds go to an account in Switzerland belonging to I. Trentham. I think your mirror woman and my vanished widow are one and the same." Tuppence frowned. "Then which came first, the impersonation or the inheritance?" "Could be both. If Sylvia faked her death, she could have returned as Mrs. Lawton, used the widow's identity to collect whatever her late husband left behind." "But why the letter? Forget what you saw, that wasn't from Trentham. It sounded like a woman's warning." Tommy nodded slowly. "Suppose Sylvia, or Mrs. Lawton or whoever she is, was double-crossing Trentham. Suppose she threatened to expose him? Tuppence rose, pacing. Then he'd have every reason to silence her. But the beauty salon detail... She came back, Tommy. She came back under his name, Mrs. Trentham. He looked up sharply. You think she married him? Or pretended to protect herself, or to finish what she started? Tuppence's eyes caught the lamplight, bright, keen, and alive with speculation. There's a reason bodies sometimes vanish, Tommy. It's because they get up and walk away. The following afternoon, Tuppence returned to the marina for one last question. The air had turned brisk, and the river lapped against the posts with a low, secretive sound. Blythe looked surprised to see her. Back again? Thought you'd wrung me dry. Just one more thing, she said. When Mr. Trentham paid you to keep quiet, did he pay in cash? He nodded. Yes. £50 notes, crisp. Came in an envelope stamped with Cranley's seal. And did you see him alone? Blythe hesitated. No. He had a lady with him. Pale hair, veil over her face. Never spoke a word, but she looked at me like she knew exactly what I'd done. Tuppence's voice dropped. And that wasn't Mrs. Lawton? He shook his head slowly. Didn't look like the photograph the police showed me. But I'll tell you this. If Sylvia Durrant died that day, then she died twice. Back in the car, Tuppence sat still for a long moment, the hum of traffic distant and meaningless. The case, once eccentric, had become something darker, a game of identity where the players changed faces as easily as names. She glanced down at her notebook. Sylvia Durrant, dead or alive. Mrs. Lawton, real or replaced. Leonard Trentham, liar or lover. One line beneath the rest, she wrote, The reflection always moves when you do. That night, as the wind rattled softly at their window, Tommy found her still awake, papers spread around like fragments of a shattered mirror. He laid a hand on her shoulder. You've nearly got it. Haven't you? Tuppence looked up. Almost, but something's missing. A motive strong enough for a woman to fake her death, and another to disappear entirely. Tommy smiled faintly. Or perhaps they were never two women at all. Tuppence blinked, then slowly smiled. Oh, Tommy, she said softly, that's the cleverest thing you've said all week. Outside, a clock struck midnight, its sound muffled but insistent, like an echo from the past that refused to fade. And somewhere, behind the glitter of Mayfair and the hush of Belgrave Square, a woman with pale hair and a silver-handled cane stepped out of a waiting car, her reflection trailing her in the window as she vanished into the dark. Tuppence Beresford was not, by nature, a collector of society magazines. But when one falls open on a tea table and offers a clue disguised as gossip, even the most refined disdain must give way to curiosity. It began innocently enough. A half-hour before tea, she was riffling through the week's post, sorting bills from promises, when a folded copy of Society Review slid from between two circulars. It wasn't addressed to her. Mrs. Johnson from next door must have dropped it. Tuppence would have ignored it entirely, until a photograph on the back page arrested her. A garden party. Women in chiffon hats, men in stiff collars, champagne glasses held at angles of practiced leisure. And at the centre, two faces side by side. Her teacup stilled in mid-air. Mrs. Iris Lawton and Sylvia Durrant. At least the caption claimed as much. But the resemblance was uncanny enough to make even the printer doubt his sanity. Same height, same slant of smile, only a small difference in the tilt of the head and the expression of the eyes. Sylvia's gaze was bright, deliberate. Mrs. Lawton's, melancholy, perhaps frightened. Tuppence's pulse quickened. "Tommy," she called, half laughing, half breathless, "come here this instant before I convince myself I've gone mad." Tommy appeared from his study, glasses perched on his nose, holding a sheaf of notes. "If it's about another hat catalogue—" "Look," she thrust the magazine under his nose, "tell me who you see." He squinted. "Well, that's Mrs. Lawton, our missing widow, and her mirror image, if ever there was one. Sylvia Durrant, the one who drowned but didn't leave a body." Tuppence sat, the magazine spread before her like an autopsy of coincidence. This photograph was taken 3 years ago, before Sylvia's supposed accident. They were friends, or at least social acquaintances. That means they moved in the same circles. "Which means," Tommy said, lowering himself into the chair opposite, "they had the same enemies." He laid his own notes beside the magazine. "And speaking of enemies, listen to this. I had a word with Cohen again. He's traced the transfers from Cranley Investments. Leonard Trentham's firm has been quietly sending large sums to an anonymous account in Geneva, under the initials IL. Tuppence frowned. IL. Iris Lawton. Exactly. But there's a catch. The account was opened after she disappeared. Either someone is using her identity, or our vanished widow is very much alive and very enterprising. Tuppence's eyes brightened. Or someone is pretending to be her, just as she once claimed she saw herself being murdered. That, Tommy said, is an irony worthy of the devil. She pushed the photograph toward him. If Sylvia Durrant and Mrs. Lawton look that alike, then one could easily impersonate the other. Sylvia could have taken Iris's place, or Iris could have pretended to be Sylvia after her accident. He leaned back, tapping the edge of the magazine thoughtfully. And whichever one lived long enough to handle the accounts is now moving Trentham's money. No wonder he's nervous. The clock struck 10 that night, soft and deliberate. Their flat was unusually quiet. Even the street outside had grown still, as if London itself were holding its breath. Tommy yawned. You realize, of course, that this whole business could be explained by the simple fact that all fashionable women look alike after dark. Tuppence ignored him. She'd propped the photograph on the mantelpiece and sat before it like a scholar before an ancient text. I can't get that expression out of my mind, she murmured. Look, Sylvia's eyes are knowing, almost mocking. Mrs. Lawton's are haunted. And yet, there's something of the same fear in both. Fear of what? Of being found out. Tommy reached for his pipe, only to pause mid-motion. Do you smell that? Tuppence inhaled. A faint, unmistakable trace drifted through the air, lavender and powder, the same scent that had haunted every step of this case. Her chair scraped the floor as she rose. The window, she whispered. It stood ajar, though she was certain she had latched it earlier. The curtains moved faintly, a ghostly ripple in the lamplight. Tommy crossed to the sill, scanning the street below, nothing but the empty glow of the lamppost and the whisper of distant footsteps. They checked the rooms methodically, nothing disturbed, no footprints, no sign of intrusion. Yet when Tuppence returned to the sitting room, she froze. The photograph was gone. The space on the mantelpiece was empty save for a faint dust mark where the frame had been, and that lingering, taunting perfume. Tommy's face hardened. Well, he said, we can safely strike coincidence off the list. Someone was here. Tuppence clenched her fists. Someone who knew exactly what mattered. They didn't touch the cash box or the notes, only the photograph. That means it was no burglar. Perhaps Trentham sent one of his charmers to tidy up loose ends. She turned, her eyes sharp with fury. Or perhaps the lady herself came for it. The next morning was one of clipped tempers and silent resolve. Tuppence refused breakfast, replacing it with black coffee and restless pacing. Tommy, reading the morning paper, finally set it aside. You're thinking of setting a trap. I'm planning one, she corrected. Whoever took that photograph will assume we're off guard. They'll think we'll wait for them to make the next move. And instead, we'll make it for them. She began ticking off on her fingers. First, we spread the rumour, subtly, that we found a second copy of that photograph. Something Trentham or his companion won't be able to ignore. Tommy smiled faintly. You do enjoy stirring hornets' nests, don't you? Only the profitable ones. He watched her fondly, though a line of worry crossed his face. You realize this might bring them to our door again. That's the idea. She turned toward him then, softer now. Tommy, whoever's behind this is dangerous, but not invincible. They've made one mistake already, coming into our home. I won't let them think we're prey. Then I suppose I'd better fetch a bigger net. By afternoon, the Beresfords' flat looked as innocuous as ever, though a single magazine lay conspicuously on the coffee table. Inside, a carefully clipped advertisement for a photographic exhibition bore a penciled note in Tuppence's handwriting. Mrs. Lawton and Sylvia Durrant, original negatives located, viewing by appointment only. It was bait, beautifully arranged. Tuppence inspected the placement, then nodded. Perfect. We'll leave the lights low tonight, the window slightly open. Let's see who bites. Tommy, half amused, half anxious, loaded his revolver. I never thought I'd guard a baited magazine before. Every profession evolves, she said serenely. The Beresfords sat in silence, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock and the soft hum of passing traffic. Midnight came and went. Tuppence began to doubt her instincts. Then, footsteps, slow, careful, measured. A shadow passed across the sliver of lamplight beneath the door. A click, the faint scrape of metal against the lock. Tommy's hand tightened on his revolver, but Tuppence shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. The door opened. A figure slipped inside, slim, graceful, and utterly composed. A gloved hand reached toward the magazine on the table. Tuppence stepped forward, voice clear and calm. "Looking for something, Mrs. Lawton, or should I say, Sylvia?" The intruder froze. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the woman slowly raised her head, the veil over her face catching the lamplight. "Mrs. Beresford," she said softly, "I warned you to forget what you saw." Tuppence's voice was steady. "And you didn't take your own advice." The woman smiled faintly. "No, because I can't forget either." Before Tommy could move, she turned, fled through the open window and vanished into the night. Tuppence stood motionless, her breath catching. On the table lay the magazine, and beside it a glove, pale blue, torn at the wrist. She picked it up slowly, the faint scent of lavender rising from it once more. Tommy exhaled. "You saw her clearly?" "Yes," Tuppence said quietly, "and now I'm sure. It was Sylvia Durrant or Mrs. Lawton, but not both." She turned the glove over in her hand. "She's alive, Tommy, and she's running out of places to hide." He smiled grimly. "Then we'd better catch her before she decides to stop running." Tuppence placed the glove on the mantelpiece where the photograph had been. "Let her come back for this one too," she said softly. "Next time she won't find an open window." The advertisement looked almost innocent in print. Tucked discreetly between a notice for a missing Pekingese and a request for piano pupils, it read, "Confused witness willing to forget, if properly reminded. Rendezvous at the Criterion Theatre, Friday, 8 p.m. Tuppence folded the newspaper with a small, satisfied smile. "It's perfect," she said. "Mysterious, faintly melodramatic, and impossible to resist." Across the breakfast table, Tommy looked unconvinced. "It's also an engraved invitation to get murdered in a dress circle." "That's what makes it irresistible," she replied cheerfully. "Besides, no one's going to attempt anything at the Criterion Theatre. It's too public, too respectable, and I intend to be surrounded by an audience." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "And what precisely are we baiting our fish with?" She sipped her tea. "Curiosity. They've already broken into our home, they've stolen a photograph, and they know we're close. This will either draw them out or flush them away. Either way, we'll have movement." "Movement, yes. Toward peril, probably." She smiled sweetly. "Then you'd better wear your best tie, darling. If we're to face danger, we may as well look smart." By 8 o'clock Friday evening, the Criterion Theatre hummed with its familiar blend of perfume, murmured conversation, and orchestral tuning. Crystals in the chandeliers caught the light like laughter, and the audience shimmered in evening finery, ladies in satin gloves, men in immaculate black tie. Tuppence had chosen her seat with surgical precision. 6th row, aisle seat, perfect view of the stalls and exits. She wore a dove-grey gown and a small hat with a net veil, elegant but unassuming. Tommy, positioned 2 rows behind and slightly to the left, scanned the house through his opera glasses with the discreet vigilance of a man pretending to admire the architecture. The overture began, and with it, the faint thrill that always came when Tuppence's schemes crossed from theory into theatre. She let the music wash over her and waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. She began to think she'd misjudged, until, in the hush between acts, a soft voice brushed her ear. "You shouldn't have meddled." Tuppence froze. The woman had slipped into the seat beside her, moving with the noiseless grace of someone who had practiced vanishing. She was veiled, her face obscured, the faint glint of pearls at her throat. Her perfume, lavender and powder, clung to the air between them. Tuppence's pulse quickened. "Mrs. Lawton," she whispered. The woman's gloved hand tightened on her bag. "Forget what you saw, for your own sake." "I can't," Tuppence murmured. "It's far too interesting." There was the smallest pause. "You don't understand. They'll kill you, as they did her." "Who?" But the woman was already rising. The seat creaked softly, and before Tuppence could follow, she had melted into the departing crowd, a shimmer of veil and perfume swallowed by applause. Tommy was on his feet instantly. "She's heading for the lobby," he said, shouldering through the murmuring audience. Tuppence joined him as they reached the foyer. Through the crush of coats and chatter, they glimpsed her, crossing to the side door, walking swiftly beside a man whose gait was unmistakable even from a distance. "The cane," Tommy muttered. "That's him." They followed. Out in the street, a light drizzle misted the pavement. The pair moved quickly through the crowd, the man half a step ahead, the woman's veil fluttering like a flag of retreat. At the corner, a taxi idled by the curb. Tommy expected them to enter, but instead they turned away, slipping into a narrow side alley. Tuppence caught his sleeve. "Not too close. Let them lead us." The alley was dim, flanked by old mews houses with iron balconies and shuttered windows. Halfway down, the couple vanished through a small gate into a courtyard. A single light gleamed briefly through a curtained window, then snapped out. Tuppence's whisper was fierce. "We've got them." Tommy glanced at the shadows stretching from the lamppost. "Or they've got us." "Don't be defeatist," she said, already advancing. They crossed the courtyard to the door. It stood slightly ajar, the faintest breath of perfume lingering on the air. Tuppence pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway lit only by the thin spill of moonlight from the window above the stairs. Inside, the silence felt rehearsed. "Stay here," Tommy murmured. "Not on your life." They moved forward together, shoes soft on the carpet. The air smelled faintly of old dust and something floral. A shadow moved at the end of the hall, a flicker, too swift to catch. "Stop," Tommy called. No answer. He reached the end of the hall and threw open the door to the sitting room. Empty. The furniture was sparse, a small table, a faded sofa, and a lamp knocked onto its side. Tuppence crossed to the window. The curtains stirred in the faint draught. "They've gone. Through here." She turned back, frowning. "But how? The courtyard's enclosed." Tommy examined the far wall. "There's a back gate, locked from the outside. They planned it." Tuppence looked around, her eyes catching something glimmering on the floor near the table. She stooped, picked it up, and held it to the light. A torn glove, pale blue, silk, faintly scented with lavender. Her expression hardened. She was here. Tommy took it gently from her, same as the one she left before. "Or she leaves them as signatures," Tuppence said grimly, "like calling cards." He gave the room a final survey, his soldier's mind taking in the details, the overturned chair, a cigarette still smouldering in an ashtray, the faint impression of footprints near the hearth. "They left in a hurry," he said, "but they weren't panicked. This was planned." Tuppence nodded slowly. "They wanted us to follow, wanted us to see this." "Why?" "To prove they're in control." She turned toward the door, chin lifted. "Which means they're afraid we might not be much longer." Outside, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the cobblestones gleaming under the lamplight. The taxi that had waited earlier was gone. Tommy glanced down the street. "We're losing ground, Tuppence. Every time we get close, they vanish like smoke." She adjusted her hat. "Smoke, perhaps, but smoke leaves a scent, and I can follow it." He smiled faintly. "I'll take your word for it. My nose for perfume isn't what it was." She slipped her arm through his. "We'll return tomorrow in daylight. Someone around here must have seen them. People notice more than they admit." He nodded. "And what about the glove?" "It stays with me," she said. "I want her to know she dropped something she can't replace." As they walked away, the theatre's distant laughter floated on the night air, mingling with the city's hum, a reminder that even in the heart of mystery, life continued to applaud itself. The following morning, the Beresfords returned to the mews. The house looked even smaller in daylight, its windows dull, its curtains drawn. A milk bottle sat untouched by the door, thick cream separating at the top. Tommy knocked. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. "Let's find the caretaker," he said. A woman in a shawl appeared from the adjoining house, a broom in hand and suspicion in her eyes. "You looking for number 5? "Yes," Tuppence said. "The tenants, man with a cane, lady with a veil?" The woman sniffed. "Moved out last night. Didn't take much with them neither. Came in a car just before midnight. Drove off like the devil was at their heels." Did they say where they were going? Didn't speak a word to me, but I'll tell you something queer. Yes? They had another woman with them, looked near fainting, pale as paper, could barely stand. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a look. Did you see her face? Tommy asked. Not clear, but she was wearing the same kind of coat as that other lady, grey with fur at the collar. I thought for a moment they were the same person. Tuppence's heart quickened. Thank you. You've been very helpful. The woman nodded, resuming her sweeping. Mark my words, nothing good ever comes of those who move by night. As they turned back toward their car, Tuppence stopped suddenly. Tommy, think about what she said. 2 women, dressed alike, one fainting. What if it wasn't Sylvia at all? You think Mrs. Lawton was there? She's alive, and either she's being taken somewhere or she's playing her part in something even worse. He frowned. What sort of part? The final act, Tuppence said softly. And if I'm right, the curtain hasn't fallen yet. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the rooftops and the city lights blinked awake, Tuppence stood at their window, watching the reflection of the street below. We're close, she murmured. She's trying to warn me. That woman at the theatre, she could have attacked me, but she didn't. She said they'd kill me as they did her, meaning Sylvia, or whoever took her place. Tommy joined her, his hand warm over hers. You realize what this means, don't you? That we've been chasing the wrong ghost, he nodded, and that the next one we meet may not be as forgiving. Tuppence turned, her expression resolute. Then we stop waiting for them to come to us. It's time to choose the battleground ourselves. Any suggestions? Her eyes glinted. Yes, somewhere they think they control. Trentham's world, his money, his lies, his perfect little empire. If we stir it hard enough, something rotten will float to the surface. Tommy smiled. That's my girl, stirring the pot of sin and profit. She leaned her forehead briefly against his shoulder. Tomorrow we go hunting in daylight. No veils, no shadows, just the truth, and perhaps 1 or 2 elegant lies of our own. Outside, the city's orchestra of car horns, laughter, and footsteps rose again, echoing faintly like applause after a performance. And in the distance, somewhere between Belgrave Square and Hampstead, a woman in a grey coat sat in a dark car, turning over a single glove in her hands. The lavender scent lingered still. The sound reached them before the sight did, voices sharp with authority, boots grinding against cobblestones, the metallic rattle of equipment. It was not yet 8 when Tommy and Tuppence rounded the corner into the narrow mews they had visited only hours before. What had been quiet and shadowed last night now thrummed with official urgency. Police constables stood at intervals along the small street, corralling the curious. A black motor van waited ominously near the central arch, and near the entrance to the little courtyard behind the houses, a barrier of uniforms and solemn faces marked the scene. Good Lord, Tommy murmured, we're late to our own party. Tuppence's expression held no humour. The air smelled faintly of coal dust and something darker, shock perhaps, or the fragile dread that hangs over sudden violence. A constable stepped forward, palm raised. Restricted scene, sir. Move along. Tuppence lifted her chin. We are Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. Inspector Marriott knows us. Kindly inform him we are here. The constable hesitated, then moved off to consult. Within moments, Inspector Marriott himself emerged, coat collar up, expression grave. Mrs. Beresford, he said by way of greeting. I suppose it was too much to hope you'd stay away from this. Her voice was steady. We were here last night. His eyebrow twitched. So I've been told. And what, pray, were you doing skulking in a deserted mews after midnight? Tommy answered calmly. Following a lead, as I assume you are now. Marriott exhaled sharply, weary but not hostile. Come then, but keep your wits. This is a delicate business. He led them past the barrier and into the courtyard. The door to the small house stood open. Scuffed at the edges, the lock splintered, as if someone had forced entry or exit in haste. Down the narrow steps to the cellar, it was dim and close, the smell of damp and coal choking the air. Lamps cast harsh halos on brick walls, and the scrape of a spade echoed faintly where crime scene men worked with precision. At the base of the stairs lay the stretcher, and upon it, the body. Tuppence stopped mid-step. For a moment, she thought her mind would refuse to register the scene. A woman, slim, elegantly dressed in a grey coat with fur trim, blonde hair disordered around a pale face marred by bruises at the temple and jaw, hands folded stiffly as though even death had tried to arrange itself with dignity. Her breath caught. "Oh." Tommy's hand closed lightly around her arm. Inspector Marriott spoke low, respectful. "Found early this morning. Coal merchant reported a broken lock. Body hidden beneath sacks." "Who is she?" Tuppence whispered, though she dreaded the answer. Marriott shook his head. "We can't be sure yet. Face is bruised and features, well, you see. But the clothing matches last night's description." Tuppence forced her voice to steady. "There was another woman here, pale, faint, wearing the same coat. Someone disguised one as the other." Marriott nodded grimly. "You may be right, and if so, that complicates matters." He lifted a small evidence bag. Inside lay a theatre ticket stub. Criterion Theatre, same performance, same night. Tuppence stared. "A match to mine." "And this," Marriott continued, holding another bag. "A cheque stub signed in neat script, L. Trentham." Tommy's expression hardened. "Well, that ties our charming financier rather tightly to the event." Marriott's voice was level. "It places him near the victim and suggests money changed hands recently." Tuppence leaned forward, examining the ticket stub. "This was deliberate, staged. Someone wanted the body found, wanted us to see what happens to those who know too much." Her face tightened. "And they wanted to frighten me." Marriott studied her. "I'd say they've succeeded, if only slightly." Tuppence didn't rise to the bait. "Inspector, last night we saw the woman alive, and another woman with her. They left together." "Then we must discover which one did not return," Marriott said. "And why." He turned to his men. "That's enough. Bring her up." As the stretcher rose, Tuppence stepped back. Something inside her twisted, not quite grief, not yet guilt, but the raw, bitter knowledge that she had set events in motion and someone had paid for it in blood. Above ground, the light felt foreign. The crowd had grown thicker, curious faces peering from windows, neighbours whispering in clusters. The world moved on, unaware of the invisible thread binding two women's lives in a tangle of identity, betrayal, and fear. Tuppence stood very still, watching the stretcher carried to the van. "Sylvia," she murmured, "or Iris, or both." Tommy touched her shoulder. "You couldn't have known." "I could have feared it," she replied softly, "and part of me did." She looked toward the carriage arch where the city waited beyond the narrow street, indifferent, glittering, alive. "We must finish this," she said, "before another woman dies, whoever she is." Back at their flat, Tuppence set the torn glove on the mantelpiece beside the cold fireplace. It lay there like an accusation, delicate fingers curled in mid-gesture, as though reaching for help too late. Tommy busied himself making tea, not because tea would solve anything, but because English desperation often disguised itself as politeness and boiling water. "Tuppence," he began gently, "you mustn't take responsibility for—" "I sent for her," she interrupted. "I challenged her. I drew her out, and now she's dead." He sighed. "We don't know that yet." She paced, agitation coiling through her movements. "Two women, Tommy. Two faces, one life between them, both hunted. I can't shake the feeling we've been chasing shadows while the true danger walked beside them." He crossed to her, steady, grounded. "Listen to me. Whoever she wasn't killed because of you. She was killed because someone else feared the truth, and that someone is the one we're after." She met his gaze. "Then we find them. And we don't go alone into any more trap-like theatres." Despite everything, a ghost of a smile crossed her face. "No. Next time we choose a safer venue. Perhaps a nice churchyard." "Much safer," Tommy said dryly. Her humour faded. "We're dealing with someone who kills without hesitation, someone who steals identity as easily as one changes gloves." Her voice tightened. "And someone who watched us last night. I felt it." He nodded slowly. "So did I." She inhaled, slow and steady. "Then this is war." "Civilian war," he corrected, "which means we use our wits, not brute force. We set the next move." She turned to the mantel, staring at the glove. "I will, but I'll not be goaded into carelessness again." Tommy raised his brows. I never thought I'd see the day you distrusted your own cleverness. She didn't answer, only stared into the cold hearth as though reading untold lines in the ashes. That afternoon, Inspector Marriott called at their flat. He stood on the threshold, hat in hand, expression more serious than before. "We've identified the body," he said without preamble. Tuppence's breath hitched. "It is Sylvia Durrant." Silence stretched. Tuppence swallowed. "You're certain?" "As certain as science and personal effects allow. Rings match her employment records, dental impressions match the hospital file." "And Mrs. Lawton?" Tommy asked quietly. "No sign." Tuppence's heartbeat thudded painfully. "Then she is alive." Marriott nodded. "Alive and running, or being made to run." He stepped inside, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. This is no longer a drawing-room puzzle. This woman is in mortal danger. And so are you." Tuppence's chin lifted. "All the more reason to solve it quickly." Marriott rubbed his temple. "Mrs. Beresford, I respect your instincts. Heaven knows you've steered us straight before. But this case, money, identity, threat, it's the sort that ends badly when amateurs persist." Tommy bristled slightly. "We are many things, Inspector, but amateurs isn't the right word." Marriott huffed. "Fine. Semi-professionals with very poor self-preservation instincts." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Flattery will get you nowhere." He leaned closer. "Just promise me you won't go anywhere alone. Whoever killed Sylvia may now target her double, or those who know too much." Tuppence nodded. "I promise to be cautious." Marriott grumbled. "I meant obedient, but I know better." He turned to leave. "If you find anything, call me, and do not, under any circumstances, attempt another clandestine meeting." She lifted a brow. "That depends on whether clandestine meetings attempt me." He groaned and left without further argument. Evening edged in, the light outside turning gold then grey, as if the city itself dimmed in sympathy. Tuppence stood at the window, watching a lone passer-by hurry along the street, collar turned up against a chill that was more mood than weather. She spoke quietly. "If Sylvia died last night, she died under my gaze. I could have intervened." Tommy shook his head. "You couldn't have known which woman was in danger, and you weren't armed or prepared." "I should have been," she murmured. He placed a hand atop hers. "We know now, and we move forward." She nodded, though her gaze remained distant. "Then tomorrow we start where all this began, with the reflection, with the house opposite Mrs. Lawton's boarding home." She drew a steady breath. "If Mrs. Lawton is alive, that's where the truth will show itself." Tommy squeezed her hand gently. "And if the truth doesn't want to be seen, then we make it." She turned from the window, resolve sharpening her posture. "No more shadows. No more guessing. We unravel this, or we trap the one who has spun it." Her eyes flicked to the torn glove on the mantel. "And if she is still alive," Tuppence whispered, "I will find her before the man with the cane does." Tommy nodded. "Together." Tuppence exhaled, slow and fierce. "Together." Outside, the first street lamp flickered on, casting light across the quiet road. A thin scent, lavender and something colder, seemed to hang in the room for a moment before dissolving into the air. And somewhere unseen in the dusk-washed city, a door closed softly, footsteps hurried on stone, and a terrified woman who had once been two slipped deeper into hiding, clutching at a name that was no longer her own. "You're sure about this?" Tommy asked, watching Tuppence fasten her gloves with unnerving calm. "As sure as one can be before walking into the lion's den," she replied lightly. "Only this lion prefers cigars and forged checks to raw meat." He frowned. "It's one thing to bait him, it's another to do it alone." "That's why you're coming," she said, picking up her handbag. "Just not visibly. You'll be the invisible guardian angel in the shrubbery." Tommy sighed. "Invisible guardian angels don't often get invited to dinner." "Then think of it as reconnaissance. If I'm not out by midnight, you may assume I've become the brandy course." He groaned. "You make gallows humour sound fashionable." Tuppence smiled. "Darling, fashion is all about confidence." Leonard Trentham's country estate lay an hour's drive outside London, a low, elegant house of pale stone and manicured hedges. It looked exactly as its owner would have wished, civilized, self-assured, and quietly expensive. The sort of place where secrets could take tea and be perfectly comfortable. When the car swept up the drive, Trentham himself was waiting on the steps, immaculate as ever. He leaned on his silver-handled cane, his smile as smooth as lacquer. "Mrs. Beresford," he said warmly. "A pleasure, and such admirable punctuality." Tuppence gave a faint, ironic curtsy. "I find it good manners to be prompt when one's about to cause scandal." He chuckled. "Scandal? My dear lady, we deal only in business." "Then you'll find my business very profitable indeed," she replied. As the butler took her coat, she noted the interior, modern furniture mixed with older, more solid pieces. It was the sort of home that shouted taste but whispered guilt. They sat in a drawing-room lined with portraits, stern men, softer women, all of them watching silently as Trentham poured brandy. He handed her a glass. "So," he said pleasantly, "you claim to have, what was the word, proof?" "Of fraud," she said, crossing her legs neatly. "Signatures, transfers, and a certain check stub linking you rather inconveniently to a dead woman." He raised an eyebrow. "My dear Mrs. Beresford, your imagination outpaces the facts." "Perhaps, but it tends to land close to the target." He smiled thinly, swirling his brandy. "Tell me, did you come here to accuse me or to bargain?" Tuppence met his gaze without blinking. "That depends on your honesty." A low chuckle escaped him. "Honesty is an overrated virtue, but very well. Since you've come this far, you deserve a story." He rose, walking to the window. The light from the setting sun cut across his face, carving it into shadow and amber. "You think Sylvia Durrant was my victim," he began. "You're wrong. She was my partner." Tuppence's heartbeat quickened. She kept her voice even. "Partner in what?" "In theft, naturally. Not crude burglary, you understand. Intellectual theft. Sylvia was clever, beautiful, and as ambitious as sin. Together we planned to assume Mrs. Lawton's identity." "To what end?" "To claim her husband's hidden inheritance. Old Lawton was sentimental. He'd hidden funds in overseas accounts under aliases. Sylvia discovered them while employed at the firm. She saw a chance to reinvent herself as a wealthy widow." Tuppence leaned forward slightly. "And Mrs. Lawton?" "Would have been none the wiser, until she became inconvenient." He smiled faintly, the expression chilling. "You see, Mrs. Lawton began to suspect. She came to me, poor trembling fool, insisting she'd seen herself murdered. She thought she was going mad. Sylvia and I staged it, of course, an illusion meant to frighten her into silence. So, the witness who saw her own death was the victim-to-be," he finished softly. Tuppence felt her stomach twist. "You frightened her to death." "Not intentionally. Fear makes people unpredictable. She fled, perhaps to the police, perhaps to someone else. Sylvia panicked. Our charming alliance began to crumble." He turned, eyes glinting. "She wanted the money for herself, threatened me with exposure. She said she'd make sure everyone thought I'd murdered Iris. You can imagine how that felt." "Quite," Trentham smiled thinly. "So, I decided to take control. A small scuffle, an unfortunate fall. She died quickly." "And Iris?" Tuppence asked quietly. "Gone. Vanished. Perhaps dead, perhaps not. But either way, the inheritance will soon be mine, and by tomorrow morning I shall be very comfortably abroad." He lifted his glass. "To new beginnings." Tuppence set hers down with precision. "You speak of murder as though it were a change of address." He laughed softly. "You're an intelligent woman, Mrs. Beresford. Surely you understand that morals are a luxury of the poor." "Then allow me to be impoverished." She rose, voice firm. "You've confessed to murder." Trentham smiled. "A pity you have no proof." "I think your check stub and your own tongue will suffice." He shrugged. "I think not." He drew open a drawer. The pistol gleamed, black and businesslike. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I dislike disorder." Tuppence did not flinch. "You intend to kill me?" "Regrettably, yes. You're too competent and too curious. Curiosity, Mrs. Beresford, is a fatal flaw." Her lips curved faintly. "So I've been told." The faint crunch of gravel outside drew his attention. Trentham's eyes narrowed. "You didn't come alone." "I never do. Before he could move, the door burst open. "Drop it, Trentham!" Tommy stood framed in the doorway, revolver steady. Behind him, Inspector Marriott followed, grim and certain. For the first time, Trentham's composure faltered. His cane slipped slightly against the floor. "How charming," he murmured. "The cavalry." "More like the conscience," Tommy said. Marriott stepped forward. "Leonard Trentham, I'm arresting you for the murder of Sylvia Durrant and the attempted murder of Mrs. Iris Lawton, and possibly my colleagues if you don't drop that toy." Trentham laughed once, a dry, bitter sound. "You fools! You think prison frightens me?" He lifted the pistol, then froze. Tuppence had already moved, her handbag arcing through the air. It struck his wrist sharply. The shot went wild, embedding itself in the mantle. Tommy lunged forward, seizing the weapon. Marriott caught Trentham by the shoulder and twisted his arm behind him. The gun clattered to the floor. It was over within seconds. Tuppence straightened her hat calmly. "Really, Leonard, you should have expected that. I did warn you I'm fond of dramatic endings." Trentham glared, breath coming hard. "You think you've won? You've only killed the last witness who could tell you where she is." Marriott tightened his grip. "Meaning Mrs. Lawton?" Trentham's smile was almost tender. "Meaning the one who took her place." "Where is she?" Tuppence demanded. He laughed again, softer this time, almost pitying. "You'll see her soon enough, but you won't know it until she's standing behind you." Marriott shoved him toward the door. "Save the riddles for the jury." Trentham's voice drifted back as he was led away. "The dead aren't the only ones who changed their names, Mrs. Beresford." Silence settled once the car carrying him had gone. Tuppence crossed to the mantel, touching the still warm bullet hole in the plaster. "Do you think he meant it?" she asked softly. Tommy holstered his revolver. "He meant to frighten you." "But he might be right," she murmured. "If Iris Lawton is still alive, she's hiding behind someone's name, and perhaps behind someone else's face." Marriott joined them, rubbing his chin. "We'll find her. With Trentham in custody, she may feel safe enough to surface." Tuppence looked toward the darkened window. "Or she may decide safety is a dream best not risked." Later, as the Beresfords drove back to London, the road stretched ahead like a ribbon of pale silver under the moonlight. Tommy kept one hand on the wheel, the other on her gloved fingers. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. "Foolhardy, you mean." "Courageous," he corrected, "and entirely yourself." Tuppence smiled faintly, though her thoughts remained distant. Trentham wasn't lying about one thing. There's still a woman out there, a living question mark. And until we find her, none of this is truly finished. Tommy glanced at her. "Then we'll find her. But for tonight, let's settle for being alive." "Alive," she echoed softly, watching the countryside slip past. "Yes, that's worth something." In the rearview mirror, the road behind them faded into darkness. But in the faint glow of her reflection, Tuppence thought she saw another face for a heartbeat, familiar, sorrowful, and gone again in the next turn of the wheels. Leonard Trentham looked smaller without his veneer of power. The man who once filled a room with charm now sat hunched in the interrogation chair, his hands trembling slightly as if the weight of his own lies had finally crushed him. Inspector Marriott stood across from him, arms folded, voice even. "You've had all night, Trentham. You can keep up the performance if you like, but the curtain's already fallen. Sylvia Durrant's body, the check stubs, the theatre ticket, all of it ties back to you. What we need now is the truth." Trentham gave a thin smile. "Truth," he murmured, as though tasting the word. "A rare commodity. But very well, Inspector, I'll indulge you. It's a sordid tale, though perhaps not quite the one you imagine." Tuppence and Tommy sat nearby, silent witnesses. She had insisted on being present, her expression composed but unyielding. Trentham's gaze flicked to her. "You should have been on the stage, Mrs. Beresford. All that righteous fury. It's practically Shakespearean." "Just talk," she said coldly. He sighed, straightened, and began. "It started long before any of you came meddling. Sylvia and I, well, you might call us accomplices, though I prefer partners." She had a flair for mimicry, a talent for faces and voices. I had the paperwork, the connections, the access to accounts old Henry Lawton had so artfully concealed. When he died, his widow Iris was too fragile to manage her affairs. She trusted me. Foolish woman. But I needed her signature to access certain funds, so Sylvia became Iris. Perfectly, I might add. Hair, dress, even the perfume. We rehearsed her until the mirror itself would have applauded. He smiled faintly at the memory, but there was no pleasure in it. For months it worked. Sylvia drew out small amounts at first, then larger ones. The bank clerks never questioned her. Who would doubt a grieving widow? Tommy spoke quietly. And the real Mrs. Lawton? Trentham's eyes flicked toward him. She began to suspect. Someone had written to her anonymously, hinting that her accounts were being drained. I believe she even hired a private investigator, though he was more coward than professional. Eventually she came to me, pale, trembling, certain that she was being watched by her own reflection. She said she'd seen herself across the street looking in through the window. He gave a short, mirthless laugh. Imagine that. Seeing your own ghost and realizing it's alive. Tuppence's voice cut through. You staged it, didn't you? He inclined his head. Sylvia stood at the window in Mrs. Lawton's gown, under my direction. The lighting was perfect, the angle precise. I wanted to frighten her into submission. I thought, if she doubted her senses, she'd retreat. Instead, she fled into madness. And you call that success? Tuppence asked sharply. He ignored her. But Sylvia changed after that night. She began to enjoy it, the masquerade, the power. She wasn't content to be a thief. She wanted to be Iris. She spoke of keeping the house, the servants, even me, as though she'd earned the right. I tried to end it, but she laughed in my face, said she'd tell the world everything, and she could have too, every detail of the scheme, the fraud, the staged vision. So we met one last time at the Mews. She came to collect her share. We quarrelled. She struck me first with that little silver-handled cane she'd taken as a souvenir from my office. I pushed her away. She fell. His voice wavered slightly, though whether from guilt or performance none could tell. It wasn't meant to happen. The coal cellar door was open. She hit her head on the stone. I stood there, listening to the sound of it echoing down the stairs, and I knew she was gone. Marriott's jaw tightened. And instead of calling for help, Trentham's tone turned bitter. Help? Inspector, a man like me has no friends, only witnesses. I hid her, locked the door, and told myself she'd forced my hand. That was the night I saw Mrs. Beresford's advertisement in the paper. The confused witness. I thought perhaps fate had a sense of humour. Tuppence's gaze was steady. You arranged another meeting with Iris. Yes, he said softly. She'd returned to London under some alias, broken and half mad. Still convinced she'd seen herself die. I wanted to find her before she found me. He looked at Tuppence now, eyes hollow. You were close, weren't you? Closer than I was. Tuppence said nothing. Trentham leaned back, spent. And now it's finished. Sylvia's dead. Iris is somewhere beyond reach. I suppose the law will call it murder, though I call it the end of a bad play. Marriott took a step forward. Where is Mrs. Lawton? Trentham hesitated, then sighed. I told you, she's hiding. Last I heard, she'd been taken to an asylum on the coast under another name. The doctors wrote to me, assuming I was her executor. They said she keeps repeating one phrase, I saw myself die. Silence filled the room. An hour later, as Trentham was led away, Tuppence and Tommy stood with Marriott in the corridor outside. Well, Marriott said, rubbing his temple, that's the most lunatic confession I've heard this year, and possibly the truest. Tuppence's voice was quiet. If Mrs. Lawton really is alive, she's more ghost than woman now. Marriott nodded. We'll verify his claim. There's a private hospital in Brighton that fits the description. I'll have someone check. He paused, eyeing her. You look pale, Mrs. Beresford. She managed a small smile. I was only thinking. Sylvia Durrant wanted to steal a life, and Mrs. Lawton wanted to escape hers. In the end, they both succeeded, just not as they planned. Tommy slipped his arm around her shoulders gently. That's enough reflections for one day. Come on, old thing, we've earned a quiet evening. But there was no true quiet that night. 2 days later, they stood outside a whitewashed building overlooking the sea. The gulls wheeled above, crying into the salt wind, and somewhere a bell chimed faintly from a chapel below. A nurse led them through narrow corridors that smelled of antiseptic and lavender. She came to us about 6 months ago, the nurse said softly. Calls herself Mrs. Lawton, though the name on her admission form is different. She's gentle enough, but her mind—" Tuppence nodded. "We understand." They entered a small sitting room. A woman sat by the window, gazing out at the restless water. Her hair was pale, streaked with silver, and her hands lay folded on her lap. "Mrs. Lawton," Tuppence said gently. The woman turned. Her eyes, clear, light grey, studied them without fear but without recognition. "Yes?" she asked politely. Tuppence hesitated. "Do you remember me? My name is Tuppence Beresford. I've been looking for you." The woman smiled faintly. "People are always looking for me. They say I'm lost, but I'm not lost. I just live somewhere else now." "Somewhere else?" She nodded toward the sea. "And over there. I saw myself go, but it doesn't matter. I'm still here, aren't I?" Tuppence's throat tightened. "Yes," she said softly. "You are." The woman tilted her head. "They keep asking me who I am. Sometimes I tell them I'm Iris, sometimes Sylvia, but they're both gone, so it hardly matters which." Tuppence reached for her hand. It was cold but steady. "You're Iris," she said quietly. "And it's over now. You can rest." The woman looked at her thoughtfully. "Rest," she repeated, as though trying the word on her tongue. Then she smiled again, small, serene. "Yes, I think I can." Outside, the wind carried the smell of the sea. Tommy waited by the gate, his hat in hand. "Well?" he asked gently. Tuppence glanced back at the building. "She's alive, but she's living in a place beyond names. In her mind she saw herself die, and she never quite came back." He nodded slowly. "Poor soul." They stood for a moment in silence, the waves breaking softly below. Then Tuppence turned toward the horizon. "She was the witness and the victim," she murmured. "And in the end, perhaps that's the cruelest riddle of all, to see your own destruction and not be able to stop it." Tommy slipped his arm around her. "Come on, darling. We can't solve the world's ironies, only tidy them." She smiled faintly. "And make tea afterward." "Exactly." As they walked away, the sea glimmered like glass under the afternoon light, reflecting nothing, revealing everything. The clink of china was the only sound in the Beresfords' sitting room. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the lace curtains, turning the steam from the kettle into faint, ghostly ribbons. The serenity might have belonged to any ordinary day in their quiet corner of London, except that Tuppence had been staring at her teacup for the better part of 10 minutes, and Tommy knew that silence for her was rarely a good sign. He poured her tea carefully, adding milk in the exact measure he knew she preferred. "You're doing that thing again," he said mildly. "What thing?" she asked without looking up. "The thing where you stare at your reflection in the cup and pretend it's thinking back." Tuppence gave a small, humourless laugh. "Perhaps it is. I was only wondering how close we all stand to madness without realising it. One small shove, one well-placed trick of light, and even the sanest mind begins to believe impossible things." Tommy stirred his tea. "That's rather a grim thought for a Wednesday." "It's been that kind of case," she murmured. "Poor Mrs. Lawton, believing she saw herself die. Imagine waking every morning wondering whether you're the ghost or the survivor." Tommy leaned back in his chair, eyeing her gently. "You've always said people can bear almost anything if it has a reason. Hers didn't." Tuppence sighed, curling one leg beneath her. "That's the trouble with deceit, Tommy. It doesn't just destroy trust between people, it destroys the bridge inside one's own mind. You stop knowing what's true even when it's staring you in the face." He smiled faintly. "Then let's agree never to dabble in fraud or false identities. It seems bad for the complexion." That drew a flicker of amusement from her. "I dare say you wouldn't make much of a criminal anyway. Too honest-looking by half." "Excellent," Tommy said. "I'll have it carved on my tombstone. Here lies an honest-looking man." She laughed softly, the sound dispelling a little of the heaviness between them. The fire crackled cheerfully in the grate. Tuppence leaned forward, pouring another cup for herself. The familiar ritual, the scent of strong tea, the warmth of the china, felt like reclaiming sanity, one sip at a time. "Do you know what frightens me most?" she asked after a pause. "It's how ordinary it all seemed at first. Just a woman calling herself by another name, a polite man with a cane. It could have been any society tangle, and underneath it was murder, deception, and madness. We walk through the world surrounded by such facades." Tommy reached for a biscuit. "Then perhaps we should be grateful we only peel back the curtain occasionally. The view behind it isn't always pretty. Still, Tuppence said, I can't help thinking, if Mrs. Lawton hadn't seen that reflection, if she hadn't believed it, she might still have her wits. It was a cruel trick of the mind. Or of Trentham, Tommy corrected, and he'll have a long time to think about that trick where he's going. She gave a faint smile. You always manage to make prison sound like a moral spa. Rehabilitation, dear girl. Even villains deserve tea breaks. Tuppence's eyes softened. And Sylvia Durrant. She wanted a new life and ended up losing her old one. There's irony for you. Tommy said thoughtfully. You know, if life were a stage, she'd be the understudy who decided to murder the lead and take her place, only to find the play closing that same night. Tuppence tilted her head, amused despite herself. Trust you to turn tragedy into theatre. It's how I cope, he admitted cheerfully. That and biscuits. The newspaper lay on the table, folded open to a small column. Tuppence reached for it, scanning the neat print. Businessman convicted after double identity scandal. Leonard Trentham was yesterday sentenced to life imprisonment for the death of Miss Sylvia Durrant. The Crown accepted evidence that the incident occurred during a quarrel over fraudulent financial activity. Mrs. Iris Lawton, whose name was falsely assumed in the scheme, is reported to be recovering in a private hospital on the Sussex coast. The couple known as Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, private agents, were praised by Inspector Marriott for their useful assistance. Tuppence set it down with a wry smile. Useful assistance. That's us in a nutshell. We untangle lunacy, nearly get shot, and the papers make it sound like we fetched the inspector's pen. Tommy grinned. A flattering understatement. Besides, anonymity suits us. Imagine what the letters would be like if the public knew we took cases. Probably offers to find missing cats or lost husbands, she said. Sometimes I think we attract chaos simply by existing. He raised his cup in mock salute. To chaos, then, our most faithful client. She clinked hers against his, and to surviving it. Outside, the faint hum of London traffic drifted through the window. Omnibuses, bicycles, footsteps on the pavement. Ordinary life reasserting itself. The kind of sound that reminded them both that peace, however fragile, still existed somewhere between mysteries. Tuppence poured the last of the tea and looked over at him. It's horrid, really, she said quietly. How close madness can come to make-believe. We all play roles, don't we? Only some people forget they're acting. Tommy smiled, eyes warm with affection. At least this time we weren't the confused witnesses. That drew a genuine laugh from her. Speak for yourself. I was quite confused, only in a more stylish way. He chuckled. You and your stylish confusion. Better than your tidy one. You always look as though your thoughts come with footnotes. Tommy leaned back, folding his hands behind his head. A sound mind requires orderly shelving. And a woman's intuition requires none, she countered lightly. Between us, we make a passable whole. That's partnership for you, he said. The kettle began to whistle again, shrill, insistent, a domestic alarm pulling them both from reflection. Tuppence rose, turning off the flame. You know, Tommy, she said over her shoulder, I sometimes think the human mind is the most deceitful mirror of all. It reflects what it wants to see and hides the cracks behind a polite smile. Tommy smiled faintly, standing to take the tray from her hands. Then let's promise to keep each other's mirrors polished. She turned, eyes glinting. With tea and gentle sarcasm. Exactly. He lifted his cup. Until the next reflection, partner. Tuppence laughed softly, settling beside him again as the fire crackled and the world outside continued its endless rhythm. The newspaper fluttered faintly in the breeze from the window, its words already fading into yesterday's mystery, while the Beresfords, content in their quiet triumph, sipped their tea as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened at all.